Okay, yeah. You can see the other poster then. In this webinar, Nilüfer Koç will take us through the different stages that have led to Kurdish women's autonomous self-organization. From the early theory of breaking off from traditional patriarchal gender roles to the effort of building up women's democratic confederalism in Kurdistan. You will be able to ask questions in written form here on the Zoom chat, as well as in the YouTube chat and comments function. To introduce our speaker, Nilüfer Koç, born in Ardahan, northern Kurdistan, is a member of the Executive Council and spokesperson for the Commission and Foreign Relations of the Kurdistan National Congress, short form KNK. She went to Germany in 1976 as a child of Kurdish migrant workers and studied biology and political science in Bremen. Her current primary political focus is the improvement of national dialogue amongst political parties and civil society organizations in Kurdistan. In addition to promoting unity efforts, Koç is active in the international arena, raising awareness of the right to self-determination for the Kurdish people as a means to protecting ethnic and religious aspects of Kurdistan. She is keenly interested and engaged in the active and autonomous participation of women in all fields of society and politics. She has conducted intensive research on the definition of feminicide and is part of the effort of recognizing feminicide, similar to genocide, as a crime against humanity in international law. Okay. Please, Ms. Nilüfer Koç.
Oh, thank you, Cihan, and thank you, Jenny, for offering this opportunity. Indeed, I will speak about very special women's movement, the Kurdish women's movement. It is special because it has many differences with the women's movements or feminist movements in history and today worldwide. In this seminar, I will raise the special side of the Kurdish women's movement. But I do believe it's important to know the very beginning of the Kurdish movement and the participation of women, because many of yours have heard about genealogy, about the self-defense forces of women in Rojava, because mainly the Kurdish women's movement became popular after the revolution in Rojava. But there's a history of nearly 30 years in which thousands of women sacrificed themselves for getting to today's stage of autonomous women's organization. That's why it's important to know some of the evolutionary process, steps of the evolutionary process of this women's movement, because it was really not easy to have a women's movement in the center of Middle Eastern Kurdistan, which is the international colony occupied by 4 states and by same a community or ethnicity which was made to a problem, the so-called Kurdish problem, by Britain and France, and then later Russia after the First World War. So it's a very complicated area. As you see today, Middle East and then Kurdistan particularly became again a center of war. Right in this area, it is a very interesting to have a women's movement, and then of course considering the social structures under colonialism, and then of course religious effects on the society. Kurds are mainly Muslim, belongs to Islam, different orders of Islam, but nevertheless Kurdistan and the Kurdish society was really a patriarchal male-dominated society, so in which women played a role as the honor code of honor, and a process of housewifeification was a natural part of the daily life of women. So their role was just happening amongst the 4 walls in their homes. With the PKK, which was founded in the 70s during the Cold War process, of course, PKK has got similarities with many of the national liberation struggles in the 70s, 80s in Africa, Latin America, and other parts of the world. But the one special side of the PKK rally at the beginning was opening door for the participation of women. So I prepared for that one for my seminar PowerPoint presentation to make it more understandable, because it's a very complicated women's movement. One side is autonomous, one side is in cooperation with mixed structures. Mixed structures means structures in which men and women are acting together. So then you have parallel structures of the women's movement. It's a little bit complicated. That's why I thought to make it understandable, I prepared the PowerPoint presentation, and I will now go to my first part. So when the PKK was founded in 78, right at the beginning, in the time of propaganda amongst the Kurdish society, already at that time, women participated in the propaganda works. I mean, propaganda means awakening of the society, because Kurdistan was already area of death policy. It was even not allowed to say you are Kurdish. So when you imagine the Turkish state oppression. Firstly, it was a political movement, and then afterwards, many of the members of the PKK, men and women, were arrested. Therefore, there was urgent need to have a defense forces, which was then founded in '84, the People's Liberation Forces. Already at that time, a few women became commanders particularly in the mountainous area in between Turkey, Bakur Kurdistan, South Kurdistan, Iraq, and East Kurdistan, Iran. So this is the Botan area, it's very mountainous and very special for guerrilla movement. Already at that time, few women were participating. Later on, the first political organization of women started then after the decision of third PKK Congress in '86, when it was decided that women need also become a component of the umbrella of the National Liberation Front. In this time, for the first time that Abdullah Öcalan, the Kurdish people's leader, is raising or sharing deeply analysis about the situation of Kurdish women. It's for the first time. Afterwards, it was then published in a book which called A Problem of Family and Women in Kurdistan. So in '87, the Kurdish Women's Union, or a Union of Patriot Women of Kurdistan, was founded in Hanover in Germany. And in that time, it was not possible to have a women's organization in Kurdistan because thousands of people were arrested. And it was the harsh time of war. That's why the first step was done in the diaspora in Germany, where 1.5 million Kurds live. And the first organization was created there. I will speak about the first Kurdish women's movement because before the movement of women started with the PKK, there were already in the 20th century some Kurdish women's association in Istanbul, in Diyarbakir, but most of them were daughters of very known personalities, like daughters of sheikhs from rich families. The differences of the movement, women's movement, which start with the history of PKK, is different because mostly women they were from rural area and from the grassroots, from poor families. This is the one main difference. Founding a first women's union was right the beginning of the end of housewifization. Means women, for the first time, left their homes for political goals. So they participate in rallies, in meetings. So they are leaving the houses for the first time. This is a picture of the first Congress of the women's movement, which was created in Germany. So unfortunately, I could not find better pictures. This is one very old one. So and then here you see women like Sakine Jans is a founding member of the PKK in 1978, and she was, after she was arrested, a heroic figure for the Kurdish women because she resisted torture in the prison in Diyarbakir in Kurdistan. And Hanım Yaverkaya is one of the first female commanders, right in 1985. And then Beste Anush is another one, and then you see Sultan Yavuz and Azime Demirtas. In the picture of Sultan Yavuz, the picture here in the mid, you see she's carrying a headscarf. Because when women participated in the guerrilla movement from the 80s, so the society has rejected them. So because of the patriarchal and male-dominated culture, they did believe that women shouldn't become a fighter. So they used just that men would be guerrilla fighters, but not women. And for that reason, women were trying to get some traditional elements like carrying headscarf. And then when the male commanders were asked by the society, why do we have women? They then said as an argument, well, the Turkish state, they destroyed our houses, our families. We were forced to take our sisters with us to the mountains. So you see here another one are the female commanders in the first army of the PKK. So they're also carrying headscarves. At that time, it was necessary because one of the important characteristics of the Kurdish women's movement is to take the sensitivities of a society in consideration. So you are not going to provocate the society, but in the meantime, you change the society so that one point will come, they will accept women without headscarf. So that's why they they sacrificed their freedom by carrying headscarves. After the uprisings, which start in the 90s in Bakur, Kurdistan, hundreds of thousands of women were participating in rallies. The first one was led by women in Mardin Kerboran already on the 21st March in 1989. Afterwards, all the Nevruz were led by women, Nevruz rallies and marches. And step by step, women then were joining the movement in the mountains, become guerrilla fighters. But then problems came up. So the PKK was terribly challenged by so many women, and traditional structures repeated itself in the mountains. So mainly the commanders were men, and women became the fighters. So the injustice between men and women were repeating in the mountains in a revolutionary movement. That was the problem, and that's why then. And otherwise, on the other hand, the men, many of the male commanders were not ready to accept the participation of women, so that some of them have sent back the women to their homes, saying, "Sister, you are not welcome here. Your physical circumstances are not ready for the mountainous areas, because you must imagine life in mountains is very harsh, particularly for women who never left their homes. So then you have climate challenges in the mountains, sometimes minus 40 degrees. And there are high mountains like the one in the mountains of Ararat, 5,000 meter high. So these were arguments which the men used for the women. You have to leave the mountains. Mountains are not the space of women. Of course, it was the reason was the men were trying to protect their dominancy in this time. The women became their competitors. That's why. And in this time, there's a talk amongst the women in the mountains together with Öcalan, where he then suggests that there must be separation in the army between men and women. The reason is not that the PKK would need women fighters, because there were already thousands of male fighters. So the reason of division, separation between men and women was the patriarchal structures in the PKK in the mountains were rejecting the participation of women. So they haven't offered women space for development, for awakening, for self-confidence. So all of the armies, and that's what Öcalan was saying, those who have armies are the oppressors, and armies emerge where there's inequality. So this was his first dialogue with women, and then step by step the women units were founded under the name of Freedom and Independence Committees in 1993. It's very important to know that. So some of the women, they also have not accepted to become member of the women's units, because very traditional influenced women thought they could not survive without men in the mountains. So there was also a problem amongst the women. But then those who understood the philosophy behind separation of the army, they were leading the process. So a women's army is not just a place where they learn military self-defense, rather it was a space where women could study about women's history, politics, culture, and many of the women learned writing and reading in the guerrilla movement, because the majority came from the rural areas and never went to school. So that was an important contribution of the army to those women. And then with enough self-confidence after separation of the army, there was time to organize on the political and social level. So that's why in 1995, on the 8th of March, the first National Women's Congress was happening in the mountains of women from the guerrilla units. And they decided to go back to the society for democratic transition in the society. This is very important. So for the first time, a women's movement is going to the villages and cities to organize women for their self-determination. So the first Kurdish women's organization, Yash, was then founded in 1995. So please consider that every offensive of the women's movement were declared on the 8th of March. The reason is because the women's movement, right at the beginning until today, they understand themselves as a continuation of the international women of the struggles of women on in history and today in the international arena. So it's a continuation of feminism, of different kinds of women's movements worldwide. I must say, in the 90s, I will go back. So this is the reason why separation of women were started in the mountains, but then later on in all social and political area. When the Soviet Union collapsed in the 90s, there were three parallel questionings. One questioning was done by the left movements who became in very deeply crisis after the collapse of real socialism. It was affecting the PKK, and Öcalan was one of them who was also questioning the reasons of the collapse of real socialism. And in this time, the third parallel is in this time, women are coming to the PKK, thousands of women are participating. So again, a problem of injustice, problem of democracy is coming to the agenda of the PKK. So these three parallel structures led Öcalan then to understand the critics of women in the movement. That's why he had then chosen to say, women are my strategic alliance. The women's movement is my strategic alliance, because he then later on described the women as the proletariat of the 21st century. So he was then going deeply to the socialist theory, where with the leaks in the theory and also in the praxis, which was then experienced in different parts of the world. And he started saying, during the whole history, women were rejected. Discrimination was a part, even in the left movements. So he then, after the women's army and then political organization through Yash, so there was already a body of women's organization, visible women's organization. With women together, he then developed the theory of killing the male or the man. Killing the male means killing power, hegemony, killing, in Öcalan's today's definition, the nation state, which is accumulation of power or centralization of power. So male or man is the concrete form representing in our society power, dominancy, hegemony, and state is the abstract form. So killing male means that. So you see, there's already moved to find a new way, or to find the answer to the reason of collapse of real socialism. Male or dominant hegemony in form of man or in state means having systems of fascism, dictatorship, despotism. Killing male means being against nation state, fascism, dictatorship, and despotism. So this is the beginning for the new paradigm which Öcalan was then describing in his books after 2000. So there's a shift of paradigm in the PKK with these theories. And the other revolutionary step is the women's liberation ideology. On the 8th, it was also declared on the 8th of March in 1998. So this is a very critical, together with women, with the women's movement, Öcalan was going deeply in all this left motivated ideologies and say, well, all of them were male touched, even they called socialist or left. So that's why they were not social, he was saying. And with the group of women from the women's movement, then they together declared the women's ideology, a liberation ideology. So, and this women's liberation ideology has main 5 principles. One is Velat Parisi, means love of the homeland. If you translate the Kurdish word Velat Parisi in English, it will call patriotism, but women's movement reject to use the terminology of patriarchy and patri. So, to preventing that there would become a shift of being abstract in the movement, so the revolution must be done in concrete space, which was called Kurdistan. So the experience of the revolution is in Kurdistan. And since Kurdistan is colonized by regional powers and internationally, they, with the aim of denial and elimination of the Kurdish people, including women, so they must also fight to liberate Kurdistan from the women's side. The other important thing was the free thought and free opinion. It's a very one of the main pillars of them bringing democracy in the society through the women. But firstly, women must feel free. So according to the theory of killing the male means separating by soul and spirit from man, from male dominance, from patriarchal culture. Without liberating from patriarchal culture, it wouldn't be possible for women to think free. So because the history of patriarchy has a history of between 5,000 to 7,000 years. It's in fact it's hidden everywhere in life and amongst us women. So the other thing is since the mixed structures means the structures with where men and women are, if you just act in these, you can't ensure the improvement and implementation of women's theories. That's why it's very vital to have autonomous structures, autonomous organizing. So in Kurdistan today, you have everywhere, wherever you have mixed political organization, you have parallel women's organization who are controlling the mixed structures. So that's why the reason why having autonomous organizations. So because the slaveholder would never allow a slave to become free. So that's why the slaves, which some of the feminists also saying women were the first colony in the world, in the history, and were made to slaves until today. Still, we are discriminated because we are women. So therefore, it was important to have a specific space for women everywhere, in each field of life, because patriarchy is it's infecting culture, music, and then, of course, through the religion, to everything. It's a system of 7,000 years which infiltrated all the fields of life. So to cleaning the life from patriarchy, you as women, there was a need of women being autonomous. And of course, the women, freedom of women means changing the society. That's why by first liberating itself, so that one of the characteristics of the Kurdish women is they never keep themselves busy with the man. So they were more busy with their own. So self-criticism was more important than criticizing men. So because if you're criticizing men the whole time, accusing men the whole time, you make the men to subject and you become yourself as object. That's why there was a difference. So criticizing your own is important. It's vital for liberation of women from patriarchy, from patriarchal system. The struggle led by women was to change the society also. The other point is the fifth pillar of the women's liberation ideology is aesthetic and ethics. So still, because in Kurdistan, we have experienced a long time of matriarchy. Before patriarchy, the Kurds experienced the longest period of their history in the form and social structures of matrilinear society, in which women were playing key role in society. So still, you find in the ethics and moral traditions in the Kurdish society elements of this time, where in some still, when you go deep, when you search deeply, you will find in the definition of shame. For example, shame beating a woman or killing a woman. In some of in the mountainous areas in Kurdistan, in rural area, you still find this. And the other point is, of course, the physical beautiness, which is today ordered by capitalism, by cosmetic sector, or by men. So rejecting this, and the philosophy is, if you liberate yourself, you became then beauty. So beautiness has something to do with the struggling, with fighting. This is the ethic and understanding of ethics and aesthetic. So after having these 5 pillars of the women's liberation ideology, there was a need to create a women's party. It was done on 8th of March 99. And this is a very critical area, the year 99. It is the time when Abdullah Öcalan was abducted from Kenya, from the US, Israel, and Turkey. So for the first time, the women's movement is acting without the practical support of Öcalan. So for the first time, men and women are facing each other without Öcalan, because until 99, wherever he was mediating. But all the time he was on the side of women's movement. So he was a strength to the women and to the women's movement. And for the first time after his abduction, the women have then seen there's need urgent founding of a new modern organization, and was then the Women's Party. After all experiences, evolutionary experiences, the women's movement changed their forms and the names. So in 2002, the PJKK was then dissolved and the new party was founded. So the evolutionary process of PJ is important, since they published the social contract for the first time. A social contract from the perspective of women, how they would live with the society as women. This was the content of the social contract. So then we'll go today to the peak of the women's movement is the women's democratic confederalism. As I said, with the beginning of the 90s, collapse of Soviet Union, the search for a new form of democracy as a pre-step of socialism, the women's movement became the keystone as the new proletariat, the new nation. So since patriarchy is well organized, whether in a society in form of the male-ruled society or in the form of state, to go deepen in the struggle, there was need to organize much more all the field of lives, and that's why the decision was, if you reject centralization of power, then you start by your own. You can't just be run by an army or by a political party. There's a need for more democratic transition. Means that each single individual in society must be offered to be able to participate in political decisions everywhere, not just political, economically, ecologically, everywhere. So the idea of democratic confederalism is building structures from the bottom, so that wherever you are organized, that any single individual in a society, particularly women, can organize itself according to the needs. So therefore, the communities of women of Kurdistan, which is today's democratic confederal organization of the Kurdish women's movement in all 4 parts of Kurdistan and also in diaspora. So there's one pillar, one of the component of the democratic confederal women, KGK, is the ideological movement, which is represented by the party PASH, which is just ideological party. Ideological party means searching, analysis, and running the academies of women. So let's say it's a brain of the confederal structure. And then, of course, you have 40 million Kurds, and then when you say 20 million are women, and all these women, the 20 million, have to be organized. So you need a widely structure of social movement. So and then in all 4 parts of Kurdistan, there are different organization structures because the circumstances and the condition in each part of Kurdistan is different to each other. So let's say Rojava is now under different conditions. They need their own, they have to decide their own forms of organizing. And Bakur Kurdistan, Rojava Kurdistan means Iranian Kurdistan, South Kurdistan the same, and the Kurds in diaspora, they're also living in different circumstances. So the social field is really differently organized. It's very diverse. And according to this diversity, you need, because the women are not homogeneous, like men are not homogeneous. So there are women who are educated, women who are from rural areas, women who are journalists, and then different profession groups. And all of their needs are different to each other. So for all the needs, you need a special organization of women, and which is happening today. We have today Union of Women Writers, Union of Women Journalists, Union of Women Physicians, Union of Artists, Union of Women Teachers. And all this, the representation of all these organs are coming together under the Women's Council or Women's Assembly in each city, village, in the diaspora, and in Kurdistan itself. So this is the social, the component of the confederalism social is the grassroots movement, actually. Then because still Kurdistan is occupied and war is continuing, you need also defense forces. So, and of course, defense, Yeja Astar is the main army, take over the heritage of the first women guerrilla fighters, and then it was declared in 2005 as the women's army. It's called Yeja Astar. And Yeja Astar is not just there to fight against the Turkish army or any other armies, no. One of the role of Yeja Astar, the women's army, is to protect women against male violence. So in one of his books, Öcalan is saying urging women to learn from the history of other national liberation movements, because many liberation movements, when they turn to peace negotiation, like in Palestine, for example, then afterwards, after the peace negotiation starts, they send the women back to home, to their houses. Said, sisters, thank you very much. Now we are in the peace process, and there's no need for women. So Öcalan was saying, you as women, stay in the mountains. You shouldn't go. You shouldn't give up your arms at the first, because it can happen that your male comrades one day, when peace negotiations start, say, sisters, you fought with us, we are grateful to you, now you can go back to home. So, and the women's army is there when it's needed, then fight against the male comrades. This is one other very important specific point of the women's army, is for the protection of women. And then, of course, there was a need also autonomous organizing of young women, since they are the dynamic against all kind of conservatism, and refreshing the mind in organization structures. So, of course, bringing new ideas, a little bit anarchism to the women's movement. So it's done by the young women's movement. It's the other component of the women's confederalism. So, and then further on, the democratic confederal structures of women has also its academies, its communes, economic cooperatives, from the bottom in the rural areas, in the big cities, in Istanbul, in Germany, everywhere where Kurdish women are organized. So the other pillar of KCK, the women's confederalism, is being against any kind of sexism, nationalism, fundamentalism, and scientism. This is important, the issue of scientism. We women, when we go to school or study, through the schools, we are then also learning that history is history, like it's called the story of man. His story, it's called in English, it's saying something true, the truth. That's why it was important to improve a specific perspective of science of women. So later on, it was then formed in form of genealogy. And then democratizing politics on the highest level, there was a need to have the system of co-chair in each political parties and people's assemblies and in mixed cooperatives, mixed communes. There must be everywhere men and women. So the idea is the man as a co-chair is representing power hegemony, and the women is representing democracy, so representing the grassroots. So there's every time a clash between the co-chairs because how to solve a problem or how to create new ideas. What are the measures or the criteria of men for creating new ideas or solving problems? In that, the female co-chair has to be careful, looking carefully on the male co-chair. So there's a clash between state and democracy, men and women. This is the understanding of co-chair system, which was developed in 2006 in Kurdistan. So making it more concrete, the autonomous structures. So the mixed structures, let's say by KCK, KCK is the mixed confederalism of Kurdistan, and KGK is the women's confederalism. So the mixed one is not allowed to intervene in the women's confederal structures, but the women can intervene. So they must intervene. This is the women's movement. They must criticize the mixed structures if they see any sign of centralization of power, hegemony. The mixed structures, they can make recommendations and also critics to women's movement, but not much more than this. So let's say the women's movement, the mixed structures, all the men has understood that women's area is untouchable. So they can make recommendation, but not much more than this. So it's a golden criteria, which is now sitting in brain of all of the people who are politically organized. In the past, it was a shame when women were in politics in Kurdistan, but today it's a shame if there's no woman in one of political leadership or social structures. So things change radically, and the criteria being democratic men is how to connect with, how to have it in front of women. So this is very important because the women changed themselves, liberated from, they're still in the process of liberation from male domination or patriarchy, but it can turn back also, of course, because we said the history of patriarchy is a very long one. 7,000 years experience is a lot. So that's why the women say we keep just one eye blind when we work with men together. So the man is a comrade, but same the enemy. So this is the parallel mechanism in the women's movement. No man is allowed to speak about female candidates in mixed structures. It's a duty of the women's movement. It's understood today. And then when you go to the ideological level, so the PKK and the relation between the ideological mixed party, the PKK and the Women's Manpash, so it's the same. And in these, you would say PKK called itself as Democratic Socialist Movement. So then it must be Democratic Socialist, but saying that they are social democratic socialists doesn't mean they must be like this. The women's movement has to take care on this, that they really became democratic socialists, the men. That's why there are two ideological parties. And so this is a women's autonomous ideological area. It's intervening in the mixed structures. And then the final one, to make it more concrete, the autonomous structures. So in every city and village in Kurdistan and in the diaspora, there are mixed people's councils and women's councils, parallel structures. So the women's councils are designating the female members of the People's Council and also the co-chair of People's Council. But to prevent any deeply confrontation, there's importance having common joint coordination bodies between the mixed structures and women. All women in the Mixed People's Council are by same member of the Women's Council. So you would say, if you have women in the People's Council, why there's need to have Women's Council? So the mixed structures means you are threatened. There's also danger of patriarchy and centralization of hegemony and power. So women in the mixed structures can be affected by this. So preventing women becoming copy of the men or collaborating with the male domination. So the Women's Council is taking care to prevent this. Then we have everywhere in Kurdistan and in diaspora communes, so all the grassroots organizations, the fundamentalistic, the basic forms of grassroots organizations. You have mixed communes and then, of course, specific women's communes. And it's the same designation of female members in the mixed communes are done by the Union of Women's Communes. And then, of course, in the field of economy and ecology, so women are looking to the mixed cooperative so that it shouldn't transit to capitalist economy. So this is the main role of the women's economy and ecology bodies or organs where they have everywhere in Kurdistan. And then, of course, academies and science. So we have for each field of the society, for each problem field, academies and universities like in Rojava, but in Bakur, Kurdistan, in Bashur, and of course for the Kurds in Rojlati, Kurdistan, we have thousands of academies and scientific organizations. The program of each academy and science in the mixed area are controlled by genealogy, because we do believe that science of women is a social science, and historically, science was the area of women in the time of matriarchy, in the time of Neolithic, in Upper Mesopotamia, North Mesopotamia. I mean, this area of pre-Kurdistan. So you see these parallel structures everywhere. And I think I don't know how it will be in the next years, but this is a special site, never trusting in mixed structures, and keeping every time looking carefully on the structures, in the mixed structures. This is the main duty of the women's movement. So as a result, today we have now everywhere where there are political parties in Turkish parliament, like the HDP, or the umbrella organization of the Kurds in northern Kurdistan, the KCD, they are all parallel structures of women. For example, of the elections in Turkey and HDP is candidating, the female candidates has to be decided by the women's movement, Kurdish and Kurdish women's movement in Bakur Kurdistan. So men cannot designate women as candidate. So this is forbidden. It's an unwritten law. It's unwritten. It became already golden tradition of the women's movement, I must say. And as a result of this organization, the Kurds have been able to create their own solution for the problems in Middle East today. So as a result, women were able to defeat ISIS in the very harsh time of the Syrian war. As a result, Kurds were able to found a grassroots democracy in North and East Syria, led by women. So as a result, Turkey, the Turkish state, which is fighting harshly against the Kurds for annihilation and elimination of the Kurds. So the women in Bakur Kurdistan and Kurdish women in Turkey actually are those who are criticizing Erdogan because he is a typical example of a male-dominated society. He is the one who's saying how much birth women have to give. So by misusing Islam, he has a specific policy against Kurdish women, which we call femicide, which is implementing now in Rojava through the jihadists, and also in Bakur Kurdistan through Turkish military and police forces. So Turkey has, next to genocide, a policy of feminicide against Kurdish women, since Kurdish women's movement is influencing Arab women and Turkish women also, because one of the main pillar or philosophy of the women's democratic confederalism is that all women worldwide are sisters. So they have to take care also when Arab women are discriminated, oppressed, or Turkish one, or Persian women, or Armenian women. We are also responsible for our neighbors, for our women as neighbors. So in this, we are not we don't have the national understanding, which is based in one ethnicity. We say women are a nation by their own. Many of the Arab women in Syria are participating in the women's movement. Also Turkish women and women from outside, but from Europe, hundreds of women have joined the women's movement in Rojava and in Bakur Kurdistan. So it's getting now more internationalistic, and it's talking now about having worldwide women's democratic confederalism in the whole world, but implementing firstly in Middle East. So, and more women from other cultures are joining. And that's why the Kurdish women movement itself saying we are not the Kurdish women's movement, we are women's movement of Kurdistan, since Kurdistan is not just inhabited by Kurds. Having these autonomous structures, we encouraged our Arabic sisters in Syria having their own spaces also. Our experiences we are sharing with all the women in our region. And with that, we believe it can be a historical contribution to solving the social and the political problems in Middle East. So that's why it's a very special women's movement to take care not just for Kurdish women, but all women in the world. So this was my part of my presentation. And if you have questions or recommendations or other ideas, I would love to listen to you. Thank you.
We thank you very much, Ms. Koç. It was a very interesting presentation with many, many informations to me myself, although I know a lot, or I think I know a lot. Yes, we already have a question, and I want to remind you all that you have the possibility to send us your questions either via the chat function of Zoom or the chat function of YouTube or the comments function. I'll read out the first question to you. It's a question from Meral. Often members of leftist movements or organizations argue that an autonomous organization for women would split or weaken the movement as a whole. How did the Kurdish women get aware about the importance of organizing autonomously, and how was the attitude of men?
Well, when we look the movements before PKK, there were no women, but even they could not solve the Kurdish problems. So all male-run rules organizations, political parties. You see this today in South Kurdistan, and they don't contribute anything to Kurdistan. But with the autonomous women's movement, you prevent that just one part of the society is participating in political decisions. So half of the energy of the society is hidden. If you think in pragmatic way, it's very smart to say, well, having the other part also becoming taking responsibility. And on the other hand, since the Kurdish women's movement don't think that centralizing decision-making structures would be for the benefit of the people, but for one elite in the society, it can turn to dictatorship. Like we experience other Kurdish parties, you can't see any women. And then look in the Palestinian model, for example, because we are sharing the same area. So in the first and second Intifada, women were leading the Intifadas. And many of them were tortured in the prisons in Israel, were arrested. What happened afterwards when the peace process starts, they send the women back. And today, you just see men in the Palestinian politics. So there's no women in Palestinian politics. So women paid high prices for the freedom of Palestine. And then you have now men who are really ruling and then using Islam as argument. When you say you are Democrat, then you look, I think the key of democracy for a man is how he acts in front of women. And the key, how the Kurds are Democrats, you will see, because Öcalan was saying the measure being a free society is the freedom of women. If you have free women, you have the guarantee of free society. So democracy is more for the benefit of women. And you can't solve the Kurdish problem through other forms like having centralization of power in form of nation state. We have the example now in Iraqi Kurdistan, South Kurdistan. I worked there for 8 years. So as a woman, you are allowed to speak, but you are not allowed to take decision. So then you have men who ruling you, who say how you have to talk, how you have to act. Why should we accept this as women? I personally say every time I would never fight for Kurdistan in which I don't have a place to exist as a woman. So why should I fight for Kurdistan in which I became as a woman's slave? I think this is a question which we have to ask ourselves as women. So.
Thank you very much. We already received some other questions. One of them is, could you say more about the first Women's Congress in the mountains and what events in the guerrilla struggle led up to it, including the role of male commanders like Osman Öcalan and the role of Sakine Cansus?
Well, there's a part in the history of the women's movement. Actually, the first Congress was happening in the end of '92. But this conference there was intervention from key figures of the PKK like Osman Öcalan. He was one of them who said women have nothing to do in the mountains. In this Congress, he was trying to influence women, saying, okay, you are now in the mountains, what you should do, you should found your family, marry here. So the women left their homes, their families, because of the oppression against them. They were searching for their freedom, for liberation. And then male comrade, saying, okay, you are now here, but what you can do in the mountains, you can become again the slave you were at your home where you came from. So that's why afterwards women has rejected to call it as the first conference because it was badly influenced by men like Osman Öcalan. And then the first one was recognized as the one in 95. Sakine Cansız's role is very important in organizing women for the movement in the 70s, particularly in the region of Dersim. And secondly, she became a keystone in resistance in the prison. That's why you find thousands of names of many thousands of women gave their daughters the name of Sakine, because she was resisting the torture in the prison of Diyarbakir, and she is the first one of the first women founding member of the PKK. But her resistance became a very spreaded story of heroic women in all four parts of Kurdistan. And Sakine was doing everything to bringing women in the movement. So that's why she played a very, very important role in the PKK for strengthening the women and women's movement.
Thank you. The next question is, could you please say something about the YPJ, and how it relates to some of the women's structures?
YPJ is the Women's Army of North and East Syria. It was YPJ, huh?
Yes.
Yeah. YPJ is a self-defense force of women in North and East Syria. Now, part of YPJ, it's more, in the last 2 years, particularly after liberation of Raqqa, many Arab women participated to YPJ, because like the experience in the mountains, even in Rojava, the defense forces offering women space for finding or for gaining self-confidence. Because in Kurdish society, traditional Kurdish society and Arabic traditional society, women doesn't exist as an individual. So you exist as one who serves for the whole family or tribe or the whole society. This is your function, your object. So when you leave your home, your family, your tribe, you then for the first time became your own. You have to take decision for the first time, because in the family, father or mother or the other male relatives have to decide for you, however, even who you are going to marry. So in YPJ, when you participate there, women, particularly now the Arab women, they're cutting their relation with their male society, learning their personal, learning how to deal with their own. This is very important historical contribution with what YPJ is doing. We shouldn't just consider YPJ as a military army. It's more an autonomous women area for gaining confidence. And of course, since you implement the idea of women's liberation in Kurdistan, then you are responsible also to protect your area. That's why you need also women's army. So since Rojava's North and East Syria as a war zone, you can't just let your fate in the hands of a mix of men army. So you are responsible also. Wouldn't there be a war in Kurdistan, I think there wouldn't be a need having armies. So we are not praising any armies, because war is a bad thing. So we are forced for self-defense. And as women, you are inhabitants of land which is occupied, which is threatened. That's why there's a need having also women's army. That's I would like to say. It must be very clear. So I think that was the question, huh?
Yes, I guess you answered the question. There are two more questions. One is about aesthetic. If you can explain it more, and one about the relation. Let me a second. About the relation with feminism, especially Black feminism.
Well, aesthetic, so there is a golden sentence of the women's movement, say, which they created with Öcalan together, saying, when you fight, you became free. When you became free, you became beautiful. So this is the principle of aesthetic in the Kurdish women's movement. And any kind of how a woman has to look, what kind of body she has to show, when it's first from outside, it's rejected by the women's movement. So the aesthetic has something to do with the chain with ideology. So liberating brain and emotions from patriarchy, from hegemony, from centralization of power, from exploitation. So aesthetic has something to do with struggling against the dominant system, patriarchy. So far you are liberating yourself from patriarchy, you will then become beauty. So this is the aesthetic, very narrow frame. The Kurdish women's movement accepted in all forms of feminism as a historical contribution to the liberation of women worldwide. So, of course, many of the feminist movements are criticized by Kurdish women's movement since they became upper class organizations. They are not leading social movements of women. So since the crisis of the capitalist system, particularly now after the pandemic, you see it's very clear. The situation of women became more worse. Domestic violence is growing. And then you ask, what are the feminists doing, for example? So it's not just enough to teach and lecture as feminists in the universities, but on the grassroots, women have questions. What is going on in the world? Why the life is changing? Why they feel pressure, structural pressure, and of course, in Middle East through war. So the feminists are responsible to share their experiences with the grassroots. So they must go to the bottom. This is the main critics of the Kurdish women's movement. So not going to the grassroots. So having good ideas, okay, you can write a great book, but who's going to implement the ideas is important. So we need also organization structures. And secondly, just keeping themselves busy with men. By doing so, they become automatically objects and the man the subject. So, which is rejected by the Kurdish women's movement, just accusing state or complaining about state or men is not the duty of a feminist movement or a feminists. So, more being self-critical, how to liberate yourself as women is the main issue. And in Black women's movement, I don't know, there are some groups that call themselves Black feminists, particularly in the States. But if you look in the African continent, there's not much movement amongst the women, organized as women. But rape, domestic violence is now on the peak, in particular in the African continent, in many of the countries. So Black women suffered a lot from colonialism. I think awakening of the Black women's movement will liberate also the African continent from the very harsh history of colonialism. And I think, I'm sure women have enough experiences since they were participating in many of the revolutions in the African continent. But in the US, as we have seen in Black Lives Matter campaigns and movement, there were very interesting statements by Black feminists, but they have to organize themselves. So it mustn't be just for one term. So there's a need being very well organized in the grassroots. I think there's a leak. There's a need to be more organized. This is what I can say, what I follow up in the Black women organizations in the US.
Thank you very much. There is another question. Kurdish women movement is struggling for the freedom of all people and all women in the world. In which sense, starting from Middle East situation, why democratic confederalism is a peace solution for all regions? and why women's democratic confederalism could be a political project of a transnational grassroots democracy.
Well, we have two democratic confederal structures in Kurdistan. One is mixed one, and the other one is women's one. So in the mixed one, you never have the guarantee it can be really democratic confederalism. Democratic confederalism means very clearly stateless democracy, grassroots democracy. Öcalan is saying grassroots are the democracy, state is not the democracy. So there's a fight between both. And the state is represented in practically, concretely in the by men, or sometimes, of course, by women also who are copying men mentally. But majority is represented by men. And having mixed democratic confederal structures doesn't mean it can be like this. So that's why there's a need of parallel structure which is controlling. If they're really honest, if they really take implementing their decisions, because when mixed structures are taking decisions, women are part of the decision in the mixed structures. So having joined these decisions, then women's movement is it's controlling the implementation of the decisions. And democratic confederalism, it's a model for solution, not just for Kurdistan, but for the whole region, and I think for the whole world. But important by implementing the ideas of grassroots organization is that we must focus on our societies. We know the histories of the states very well. So the state history is full of kings and sheikhs and men, just men. But we don't know the history of our own societies. So it's important to know, because the society is a guarantee of having democracy. In the society, the key to democracy is the women's movement. So it's the very deep fundament of democracy is the women. Women are changing the society. The society is influencing state, policy, and state. I think. And then why in Kurdistan, which was decided to have this model in Kurdistan, it has something to do, of course, with the history of the Kurds, since the Kurds before patriarchy, and even in the time of patriarchy in the last 7,000 years, Kurds were everywhere autonomously organized. They never got a central decision body, whether through sheikhs, tribes, or monarchies or theocracies. So the Kurds learned for self-determination on local grounds, whether in form of tribes or families, they could take care on their own. So this is an important characteristic of the Kurdish people, and I think before nation states and state generally, it was happening in many of this in other places of the world also. So we have to go and look in the history. For implementation of democratic confederalism. It's based on coexistence, firstly between men and women, and then of coexistence between different ethnic groups, and then coexistence of different interest groups, like different professions. It's the unity of diversity or diversity in unity. So this is the basic base of democratic grassroots democracy.
Thank you for this answer as well. We have one final question. I'll read it out to you. Explain the links and importance to international solidarity and to mobilize for the struggles against patriarchy linked to the experiences on the ground by the Kurdish women's movement.
For the Kurdish women's movement, in general for the Kurdish liberation movement, I would say what is the experience in Kurdistan is thinking globally, acting locally. So we liberate ourselves, but it's not enough. We need our neighbors also, because we do believe our neighbors need liberation, freedom also, the Arabs, the Armenians, the Assyrians, and other ethnic groups. This is one important specific point. So for that, it's important to overcome any kind of nationalism. First, the coexistence need to be against sexism, any form of discrimination of women. We call it in wider frame feminicide, not femicide, feminicide. Then, when men learn to live with women on equal basis, so you have then a pre-coexistence form, then men and women will be able to coexist with others who are different to theirs. And I think one of the reasons why Middle East was every time the war zone is because through nationalism, the states could use the peoples and ethnic groups against each other, different religions. So we overcome this problem in Baku, in Rojava particularly, and you can see that involvement of US, of Russia, of France, of Arabic countries, of Israel in Rojava, nobody could destroy this model. It survived for 9 years or 10 years now. So on the 12th is the anniversary of the Rojava revolution. So the question is why nobody could destroy this model of democratic confederalism in Rojava, because people kept together. There was no space in which hegemonial power could use the peoples against each other. So I think we have the same problem worldwide. Solidarity with the Kurdish movement doesn't mean you just make rallies for the Kurds or asking for the freedom of self-determination for the Kurds. Well, this is welcome, but trying to change the state structures, making them more democratic, it's also important to the Kurdish as another form of solidarity. And particularly now, the reason why nobody is stopping Turkey by attacking Rojava and Baku Kurdistan and South Kurdistan is that many of the states, because Turkey is a member of the NATO and Turkey is violating the NATO principles and principle of European Union, of European Council, of UN, of OSCE, and nobody thinks, hey, Turkey, stop, you are violating international law. The reason is the Kurdish solution. So they said to Turkey, the Kurds are implementing a model which is not in our interest. So you can weaken the Kurds by beating them, by attacking them. So in this critical time, there's really important need of solidarity. So if this model can survive in northern Syria, if this model can survive in northern Kurdistan, it can become a hope for the whole region. That's why solidarity now with the Kurds is for the surviving of this model, because there's no other alternative now currently. The states, they don't have alternative. They're just thinking of their own interest and benefit. And the left is very weak in Turkey, and you see they split Syria. So you can speak about Syrian democratic forces except those in north and east Syria. So who's giving the people hope? And I think this is now experience in Kurdistan, and this model have to survive. That's why it's not just a Kurdish problem. If you want to have peace in the region, because all the states, like South Africa, for example, is selling arms to Turkey through the German Rheinmetall. And if you look, Pakistan supporting Turkey, or the European countries or US, all are supporting Turkey, and Turkey say, well, I can beat the Kurds whenever I want because nobody is going to stop me. It's because of the model. So the US has not agreed on that model. European Union has not agreed, and all the male-dominated states, they say no to this model. So they have problems and say, Turkey, attack them so that you can weakening the fight of the Kurds for democracy in the region through the democratic confederal model.
Very right. Thank you very much. There's one last little question. Someone asks, how can women participate in the creation of the International Women's Confederalism? Just a brief answer on that.
Yeah. The Kurdish women movement have links to many of the grassroots women movements in Philippines, in Latin America, in Europe, amongst Arab women. So organizing common conferences like the conferences of Middle East, the one was organized in Ahmed in northern Kurdistan, and the other ones will be done after the pandemic is over or somehow weakened. And they're organizing with women from different areas common conferences, congresses, because we need to come together in some principles. With the different women's movements. So we have differences, but we need to have common and joint principles also. Now is the step in which Kurdish women's movement and members of the Kurdish women's movement are sharing experiences with them and sometimes acting together also. And the Kurdish women's movement is a member of many international democratic progressive women's movement like the International Women's Alliance, which is more organized in Southeast Asia, and also has many connections with the women in Europe and worldwide. So I think step by step, I think so in the next years, we can then start to make it concrete, the word democratic confederalism of women.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I think we came to an end of the questions, and this is the point where I would like to, just a second, you can see me when I'm reading the poster. I would like to remind you of the next webinar on July 19th, which will be called Feminicide and the Answer of Women's Self-Defense by Arien Rojava. I would be very happy if we could see you there. Thank you very much, Nilüfer. It was a great presentation. And thank you guys for listening and participating on this great webinar. From me, a goodbye. Have a nice evening. And you have to leave by yourself.
Okay. Stay safe. Bye.
You too.